Good morning. I'm Conrad with AIM Transportation Solutions. Thank you everyone for joining us. I see some familiar names in the audience and just want to say we appreciate your continued support with these webinars. And for the first timers out there, welcome. We hope we can make a good first impression so that we'll see you again in the future. Today's subject is marijuana legalization and its impact on the trucking industry. And with more and more states legalizing marijuana for medical and recreational use, this topic of concern will only grow more prevalent and have larger and larger effects on our industry. One major reason why is perhaps the most obvious. With marijuana becoming more easily accessible, usage has become wider spread. And I don't have to tell you that using marijuana and operating a commercial motor vehicle can be a dangerous, even deadly combination. Then there are, of course, the regulatory concerns, which can get especially murky considering marijuana legalization varies from state to state, and that can directly conflict with federal DOT regulations. But as always, equipping yourself with information is your first step to implementing and enforcing policies that will protect your drivers and your business, and that's exactly what today's host, Mr. John Rugarber, AIM Safety Manager, aims to provide. However, before I hand it over to John, I just want to give those newer audience members who might not be familiar with AIM a quick overview of what we do. We are AIM Transportation Solutions, and as the name implies, we offer an array of commercial fleet services, including full-service truck leasing, commercial truck rentals, dedicated contract carriage, and that's, of course, where we handle your operation from top to bottom, offering trucks, drivers, 24/7 support, and so much more. Basically, you no longer have to worry about things like what we'll be discussing today. We also offer different maintenance programs, including professional shop management, used truck sales, and freight brokerage. Now, with that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and get into the topic at hand. As I always do, I want to quickly note that we are recording this session, and in the coming days, you'll receive a follow-up email containing resources, including a link to this recording, as well as John's contact information in case you have any questions down the road. Finally, if you have any questions during today's session, John will do his best to answer them following his presentation. And now, with that out of the way, John, you are up.
All right. Good morning, Conrad. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I appreciate it. I want to first start off by thanking Jessica and Conrad for allowing me to present these presentations as time goes on. This is, again, like Conrad mentioned, about marijuana legalization. He kind of covered the details of it very well there in his introduction. Today's date's January 23rd, 2024, and my name is John Rugarber. I'm a regional safety manager with AIM Transportation Solutions. And I've been with AIM for about 22 years, give or take some. Began as a driver way back when and have moved into safety. And now I do these webinar series, and I really enjoy passing on this information as we go along. My contact number is on the bottom of the page down there, jrugarber@aimntls.com. And again, feel free to reach out at any time if you'd like to give me comments or ask questions. I'd be more than happy to get back to you and try to give you an answer. And before I move on to the first intro slide, let me just remind people that we actually have 3 more webinars coming up if you want to put these on your calendar. May 5th to the 7th, we have the annual road check is going to be presenting itself. So we're going to do a little thing before that, probably sometime in June, maybe mid-June. Look for that, or I'm sorry, mid-April. Look for that one to be done. July 7th through the 13th, we have Operation Safe Driving. They're going to focus on speeding this year. So again, maybe mid-June-ish, we're going to be looking at doing a presentation on that. Conrad and I were bouncing around some ideas for that one. And August 25th through the 31st is going to be the yearly Brake Safety Week. That's going to be a really good one. We're going to give you some good information on brake requirements and DOT inspections on the brakes themselves. So again, 3 webinars coming up. They're going to be informative. We're going to have a good time with them. And if you have time and you can attend, we'd be more than happy to have you aboard. So let's start with this marijuana legalization, and we'll go from there. All right, so I'm bringing up the license plate of Ohio itself. And the reason I'm doing that is because recently, as of November 7th of 2023, Ohio became the 24th state to legalize marijuana. It's called Issue 2. It's called the Marijuana Legalization Initiative. So if anyone within the state of Ohio wants to research that further, feel free to jump on their website and you could find that Issue 2 and look at that in more detail. But we put our heads together and felt that it was a good opportunity to bring this back up again. We had done a previous webinar on CBD and CDL possession back in, I think it was July, and we thought this would be a good time to dovetail into that and add this marijuana legalization. We do have a large footprint in Ohio and the surrounding states, Indiana, Pennsylvania, New York. So we thought that it was really incumbent upon us to bring more information to the table and keep everyone abreast of that. So that's kind of why we're doing this, and that's kind of what instigated the whole thing, was the fact that Ohio just legalized it. And that was again in November 7th of 23. And I think Conrad mentioned in his intro that things change almost on a daily basis with this marijuana information. So again, things could have changed from November 7th of 23, but at the moment we're looking at 24 states currently have legalized marijuana in one form or another. Now this next slide, I'm not a big fan of presenting information like this, but like Conrad mentioned, this will be linked and you could look into it closer on your own. I won't read it verbatim, but I will go through some of the bullet points real quick. So issue 2, and this is for Ohio only. So every state has got its own particular sets of laws and requirements. But for the state of Ohio, because the legalization has been passed, it does not require employees to permit or accommodate the use of cannabis. It does not prohibit employers from refusing to hire, discharge, or discipline employees. Okay. It also does not prohibit employers from establishing or enforcing their drug testing policies or drug-free workplace policies or zero tolerance policies. So really at the moment, it still doesn't have any impact on you as an employer if you're currently doing these things. I brought this up in bold with the green check mark because it does not interfere with federal employment restrictions, including Federal Department of Transportation, DOT regulations, which is what we fall under. So really, the things that are in place currently are not affected by this particular law. Bullet point down below it, it does not permit individuals to commence a cause of action. In essence, if you were to terminate an employee, they couldn't necessarily bring a lawsuit against you for terminating them under the use of the cannabis. It does not impact the authority of workers' comp program administrators to give you rebates or give you discounts on your policies if you participate in a drug-free workplace program. And the last item is issue 2. It prohibits operating a vehicle, and that would pertain more to the non-CDL type of people. So if you're on this call and you don't really have any DOT employees that fall under that Federal Department of Transportation requirement, it still falls under prohibiting your employee from operating a motor vehicle on a roadway in Ohio. Okay, so again, I don't really like presenting all this information on one slide, but there's really not too many ways around it. Again, anyone in Ohio, you can go into issue 2, probably Google Ohio State something, you'll find issue 2 and you can look further into more details. Now, a lot of the information that I've gathered for this is going to come from a number of different areas. One of them, and this is a great organization, it's a 501c3 not-for-profit organization. It's called ATRI. I would imagine that many of the people on this call are familiar with ATRI, but I'm not sure how many of you would actually go in and look at what they do. And they really have a ton of information on their website that you as an employer can use to make informed decisions. So ATRI stands for American Transportation Research Institute, and their website is down below. If you punch up transportationresearch.org, it will bring you to your website. Now, when you get to your website, if you scroll down, you can get to the latest research, and you'll find the research paper that's right here, this impacts of marijuana legalization of the trucking industry. This is dated as of June 2023, and this is where I've gathered some of my information. Some of the slides you're going to see are actually from ATRI. But again, a very valuable resource. I'd highly recommend that you go in there and take a closer look at some of the things they offer, because it's really good information to have if you can find the time to go in there and do it. I think their most current research paper is on detention. Any of you that are associated with them may have gotten some emails. They're asking for opinions on the detention problems that are occurring in the transportation industry right now. All right, so let's start looking at some slides. So here we have the United States as a whole, and we've taken Alaska, put that down in the lower left-hand corner, but that includes all the states currently. All the green states are pretty much all the states where marijuana has been legalized. So I'd imagine if we count them all, and they've actually included Ohio in here, that number should come out to 24. And it's kind of interesting. You could see where that West Coast line completely legalized along the West Coast, not surprising. Got a little bit of Montana, Colorado. You got that upper Midwest in here, which there's a few that have been legalized up in there, most recently Ohio. And then you'll have that upper East Coast area from Maine all the way down into Virginia, where the legalization has been put in place, minus Pennsylvania, and thinking West Virginia there kind of seems empty. Interesting here how we have that southeast region down in this area, south mid area, Texas, all the way over into Florida. That is completely still not legalized in terms of recreational marijuana. Now, another interesting fact about that is if you look close, you'll find that approximately 50% of Americans live where marijuana is legal. And that's quite a few people. I think most current stats are of 2021, and there's 331 million people in the country. So that equates to about 165 million Americans. Now, granted, they're not of all of legal age, but still, that's a large amount of people that have access to legal marijuana at this particular point in time. I can only imagine this situation is going to become greater as time goes on, as more states legalize marijuana. So this is not an issue that's going to go away. It's only going to get, I don't know if worse is the good word, but it's going to become more prevalent, as Conrad had mentioned. And again, that would identify to us that we would need to educate and keep a close eye on our employees so that we can keep a good workforce going. All right. So now this particular little slide was pulled off of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the BLS. And this is kind of interesting. This is a percentage of the US population and commercial motor vehicle drivers that reside in states where legal recreational marijuana is allowed. And this is only a 4-year window. It's from 2019 to 2023. So if you look up at the US population as a whole, the red cross-hatched area up here, back in 19, you're only looking at about 24.5% of the population were residing in the states. That number has now moved up to 49.8%, which kind of reflects that earlier slide. I think I'd mentioned approximately 50%. So 49.8 is pretty close to 50. So that's a big increase within 4 years. And you may say, well, that's the general population. That really doesn't have much to do with me. Well, ironically, it does, because down here we have drivers, commercial motor vehicle drivers. And that crosshatch area back in 19 was at 18.5%. It has now moved up to approximately 41.4%. So basically, commercial motor vehicle drivers, that number has increased almost 123% within a short span of time, 4 years. So that's not a large amount of time for that large of an increase. So these drivers are now, almost 50% of drivers live in states where marijuana is legal, and are beginning to get the hint or get the idea that, hey, marijuana has been legalized in my state. I can finish my workday on Friday and on Saturday go to a party and smoke marijuana, and I'm fine because it's legal. And this is where we as employers, or even if there's any owner operators on this call, we need to be aware that you need to let the people know that it is still not legal. Although it may be state legalized, it is not federal legalized as a commercial motor vehicle license holder. So again, kind of eye-opening on these statistics here. It's a big jump within that 4-year span, and it's only going to get bigger as more states become legalized. That number is only going to increase. So again, and these slides, it's going to be one after another of the importance of educating our employees and also keeping an eye on our employees through the course of their employment. There is going to be a slide up here, post or pre-employment versus post-accident stats, which again is quite interesting. All right, so let's take a look at this little ladder, and it's going to progressively move up. I'm going to go through the states. So in 2012, the first two states, Washington State and Colorado, were the first states to legalize marijuana. 14, we moved to Oregon and Arkansas. 16, Nevada, Massachusetts, Maine, and California. 18, we only had one, that was Michigan. 19, one, Illinois. 2020, you got Vermont, New Jersey, Montana, and Arizona. 2021, Virginia, New York, New Mexico, and Connecticut. 2022, Rhode Island, Missouri, and Maryland joined the party. And most recently, 2023, we had Delaware, Minnesota, and Ohio. Now, the District of Columbia is a little bit of a different thing. They decriminalized small amounts of marijuana in 2015. And I'm going to go back to Conrad, did a great job on that intro. The murkiness of these rules really comes into play here because it is legal for recreational use currently, although, and I didn't even know this until I began to do some research for this webinar, federal officers can still arrest people for possession of marijuana if you are on federal land. And federal land can be, for example, military bases. So military police, a military person goes out into town, decides to smoke marijuana or bring back marijuana back onto the base, they can be arrested for the possession of marijuana because they are on federal land, which is the military base. Interestingly enough, if there's any people who camp, they RV, they tent camp. I know in Washington, D.C., there's a place called Cherry Hill Campground. I've been there. These places if it falls into a national park, so not necessarily Cherry Hill, but there are national parks in the area. If you're smoking a joint on the national park and get stopped by a federal officer, you're under possession of marijuana, even though it's, quote, legal. Obviously, government areas, I don't know, I'm not that familiar with Washington, any of the large areas in Washington that you go to, Lincoln Monument, I would imagine maybe the Smithsonian Institute, I don't even know for sure, but any federal areas, if you're in possession of marijuana and a federal officer, interacts with you, you could be arrested. And here's a big one too, the federal metro transportation system, the bus. So again, you drive a commercial motor vehicle during the week, you go to take a tour of downtown Washington, you get on the metro to get around town easily, you have marijuana in your pocket, you get stopped, you can be arrested for possession of marijuana because you're on federal land. So for any of you people who are out in that Maryland, Virginia, Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, Delaware, those surrounding areas, you want to really make that aware to your employees that could occur. You'd hate to be stuck with that phone call on a Monday morning that this guy just got arrested for possession of marijuana because he went to look at the Lincoln Monument and thought it was legal, but it wasn't. So kind of information that I wasn't even aware about, and I looked a little further into it and thought that I'd put that out there for people. All right. Here's again a nicely colored map. Now, I got this information from an organization called DISA, D-I-S-A. The name is going to come up in that lower right-hand corner in a second or two. They are the largest third-party administrator in the country at this point in time. And this information was from November 30th of 2023. I'd highly recommend this website also, because what's really nice about this is you'll find this individual map in their website. It's an interactive map. So regardless of where you're from, if you wanted to go to the state of, let's just say for sake of argument, California, if you hover over the state of California on their map, a little box will open up and it'll give you the legal status, recreational status, and medicinal status of marijuana, and it will give you some more insight into the laws in those particular states. And I found that really helpful because, again, every state's a little different, but depending on what state you're in, you could be in Indiana, you could be in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Idaho. Just hover over that particular state that you're in, and that would begin to give you some insight as to their laws. So let's look at the top. You can see where legalized is, I guess we'll call it black or maybe very dark green. You got medical and decriminalized is the next category down. Medical, then you got decriminalized. That light gray is CBD with THC only, and then fully illegal. So let's look at the fully illegal states. And that's pretty easy because there's only 4 of them. You got Idaho, Wyoming, Kansas, and South Carolina are still remain fully illegal at this point in time. And they're, like I mentioned just a minute ago, that DISA Global Solutions, really good website, worth taking a few minutes, go in there, maybe put that in your computer to use as a reference, but they have some good information. And then once we get through the fully illegal, let's move on to the CBD with THC only. So again, I talked about this in the previous webinar with CBD and CDL usage. At the moment, the hemp plant, if you stay with that at or below 0.3% of THC within the hemp plant, it is legal to use. The problem is the regulated part of CBD is not that great. There is no real regulation in terms of the manufacturing of the CBD. So you really don't know what you're getting. They could say that it's legal and it may have 0.5% of THC in it, and now it's technically marijuana. So CBD oil can be made with or without THC. And those 2 different types are called isolates and broad spectrums. The isolate only contains CBD and no THC at all. The problem is you're not going to know all this if you buy your CBD at the local 7-Eleven store. And 7-Eleven itself probably doesn't know it either. So your best bet would be to stay away from it. The broad spectrum version of it, it also lacks THC, but still may contain some other cannabinoids that are associated with the plant itself. So the chart that we're looking at with this gray is really only focusing on CBD oil with THC as an ingredient. Okay, and again, CBD with the THC in those original 4 states of orange that we talked about, that will still remain fully illegal unless it's at 0.3% or less, because then it is technically not illegal. Again, gets really murky. All these statuses are subject to state limits. That's why it's really important that if you're on this webinar and you're watching from the state of Arizona, I'd highly recommend you go into the state of Arizona and find out their specific laws and regulations. Just like the District of Columbia. I mean, who knew that the federal officer could arrest you for possession of marijuana, not your local police department in one of the communities within the District of Columbia? So again, consult your state laws. This is more of an informative type of thing. I'm just giving you a huge overview of where we stand and trying to increase our education as time goes on. So. All right, so let's move on to some testing. Talk about testing a little bit. So under 49 CFR Part 40, what we do on the drug testing is basically a 5-panel test. And they look for 14 drugs out of this 5-panel test. And some of them are going to be marijuana. That's going to be one of them. Then you have alcohol up at the top, and that's another DOT test. And now in the lower right-hand corner, we have the pills in one form or another. So the 5-panel test is going to incorporate marijuana, cocaine, amphetamines, opioids, phencyclidine, which is the street name for that, would be called PCP. And there's going to be a slide coming up, and it's going to have some interesting graphs on it in the next slide or two, along with the subsets of both amphetamines and opioids, and that's how they come up with the 14. So under amphetamines, it's going to be amphetamines, methamphetamine, MDMA, or street name ecstasy. Not sure if anybody's heard of that. It's in the news every once in a while. And MDA. These are both considered what they call party drugs. I'm a little older, but party drugs would mean to me maybe a little bit younger people go out for the weekend. They're trying to stay up for the whole weekend. We've probably all done it once or twice in our life. That's probably what these people are looking to use to try to get through the weekend and have a good time. The other part of that would be the opioids, and that would be codeine, morphine, 6-AM, which is heroin. Again, not a huge, you're going to see in one of these graphs, heroin is not a huge part of this transportation organization, thank God. Hydrocodone, hydromorphone, oxycodone, and oxymorphone. This can be problematic in the sense that people have injuries. They end up going on these medications to deal with the injuries and the pain associated with them. And they could end up, in trouble with that. If any of these come back positive, obviously the MRO is going to call the employee and say, John, for example, why did this come up in your test? If you do not have a good, valid explanation for this, you're going to have issues. It's going to come up as a failed test. You're going to enter the clearinghouse information, and it's going to start a big old chain of events that you do not want to be associated with as a CDO holder. So really important to, again, keep in mind that these are possibly some of the implications of the testing program itself. So let's talk about some windows of THC detection. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out how to get a second hand in there. But I think the premise of that clock moving kind of gives us a sense of urgency in when we need to have tests done if something were to occur. So that clock, as in real life, well, at our hand, is going to continue to rotate until I get through with this slide. Just to kind of remind us that time doesn't stop just for us when things happen. Time keeps moving, and we have to fall within windows of getting things done. So for example, let's look at the windows of THC detection now. So the window of THC detection for breath is approximately 2 to 3 hours, give or take. Again, not an exact science. That's why it's called a window of time. But if you were to smoke pot, it would stay within, the metabolites would stay within your breath samples for approximately 2 to 3 hours. Not a big amount of time. Probably nothing's going to happen within 2 or 3 hours if I see an employee necessarily smoking marijuana or I think is under the influence. Next, we have oral and fluids. So that could be up to 24 to 72 hours that the windows of detection remain for that particular type of testing. Again, number 3, it's going to be urine. That's going to be up to 1 month. And there's going to be a slide coming up on, I mentioned it before, on pre-employment, post-accident. So pre-employment, I'm sure recruiting offices throughout this country in transportation have gotten the phone call. I smoke pot. How long will it be before it's out of my system? Not sure what companies are answering, but I'm sure that's a relatively common question at this point in time because of especially the legalization. Somebody smoked a joint 2 weeks ago, they're applying for a new job, and they say to the recruiter, I just smoked a joint 2 weeks ago, is that going to show up on my test? So that gives you a little bit of insight on how long those THC metabolites will stay within urine. And the last one is going to be hair, and that could stay up to 3 months. I am not familiar with the cost of hair testing. I know some of the larger companies are now instituting hair testing. We at AIM do not, and I don't know the prices. So if there's anyone on the call that's currently using hair testing, feel free to reach out to me and just give me an idea of what a test is for hair testing. Again, it's not completely current at this point in time. Not sure how many people are using it, but it is an option, and those metabolites will remain in the system for up to 3 months. So keep in mind, federal regs call for mandatory testing when you have what we'll call, for lack of a better word, hearse, nurse, or tow, right? In other words, if there's a fatality, regardless of the issuance of a citation, whether your driver gets a citation or not, he needs to go in for a drug screen. If anyone has immediate medical care or medical treatment away from the scene, that would mandate a drug test being done. And any disabling damage to any vehicle requiring a tow from the scene. So those 3 criteria, the short way version of it, hearse, nurse, or tow. So if someone dies, if someone goes to the hospital, or if one of the vehicles involved in the incident get towed, there's going to be mandatory drug testing after that. Now, keep in mind, for randoms and reasonable suspicions, alcohol tests need to be done within 8 hours. You only have an 8-hour for the alcohol to be done. Controlled substances, you're looking at a 32-hour window at that point in time. So it's really incumbent, if something were to occur, and it's not necessarily a DOT requirement, but you want to get your driver in, you want to get them in within those windows that you have available. And we'll say that that clock is effectively stopped at this point in time. All right, so Quest Diagnostics. I'm sure probably everyone's familiar with Quest. Huge company. They do a lot of testing. They do regular workforce testing. They do regular medical testing. And they do safety-sensitive employee testing. Again, another great place to go. I got a lot of this information from them. I want to give them kudos. They really do a great job in bringing out some good information. But they found, through their drug diagnostic testing index, which is up to 2023, they found that the post-accident drug positivity rate for marijuana has reached a 5-year high in 2022. I don't think that any of us find that surprising. And I could only think that each year as we go forward, you're going to see a new report, and that title is just going to add another number to the end of that year high. Next year it's going to be 26-year high. Following year is going to be a 27-year high. So I'm not sure how many years this is going to go on, but it's probably not going to go down. If you go into the Quest Diagnostic Drug Testing Index off of their website, you're going to find some of this information. You can look at it a little deeper into depth. So let's take a look at their first graph. Here we go. The positivity rates by drug category. Now, this is the annual report. Now, if you go in, you'll find a number of different graphs. This one I took specifically because it only deals with safety-sensitive workforce people. Right up here, I underlined it in red. This does not do the general workplace throughout the country, just people that pertain to us, drivers and the safety-sensitive workforce. You can see that purple line is going to be the marijuana. 2018-19 kind of stayed around steady. Now, these numbers on a percentage basis, you guys, aren't really that large necessarily. And that's kind of why it's nice to get a visual on these graphs, because if you said, I'm at let's say 9%, and now my only high end is 1%, well, that's only 0.1% higher. Doesn't sound like a big deal necessarily, but then again, NASCAR, NHRA, reaction times in driving are all in split-second decision-making processes. NHRA races are won with hundredth of a second's differences. So keep that in mind, that the graph kind of brings it to light a little better. Now, 2020, everything slowed down in 2020, so it should be no surprise that everything is going to be lower. 2021, the economy starts to ramp up, and there we go. The numbers begin to go up. And then there we are now, 2022, and we're almost at 1%. So from a visual perspective, you can see that that's beginning to make a gradual climb again. If you go through some of the items, that 6 a.m. the heroin, that's down here in that lower left corner. Again, not a huge piece of this equation. In fact, if you look at 2022, the number gets even smaller. Then we have amphetamine. Now that one's a big one. And again, it's not, doesn't have as much of an increase as marijuana, but it's still beginning to rise again. So amphetamines are still kind of out there for people. They need it to get through the day. You want to keep an eye on that. Cocaine, probably in the 80s, back in the days of Miami Vice and Don Johnson and his partner there, cocaine was a large thing to play. That number has begun to go down. You can see that slowly making a decrease as time goes on. We got marijuana. Now we have the the MDMA, or in other words, ecstasy. That number is the blue. Or let's see, that one is right in there. That's beginning to make a rise again. Opiates, both hydrocodones and nicotines, those are kind of a little bit of a gradual decline, which is a good sign. Oxycodones also, so those three are kind of following in the same thing. And thank God PCP is really a negligible part of this whole equation. Very, very small amount. PCP is a very dangerous drug, even for civilians. You can go on YouTube and find many different YouTube videos of officers having to deal with people on PCP. Now, interestingly, most recently in Ohio, the Ohio Narcotics Intelligence Center put out a notice about xylazine. That's the newest drug that's coming into play quite a bit. They're finding more and more use of xylazine out on the street of illicit drugs. It's basically an animal tranquilizer. They use it in horses, large animals. Very dangerous drug. There's also some new synthetic opioids that they're finding. So again, if anybody wants to go into the Ohio Narcotics Intelligence Center, you can go publicsafety.ohio.gov and go in that area and you can find some information on this. Also, keep in mind fentanyl is in the news now, right? Fentanyl is a big thing. It's usually being mixed with heroin. Fentanyl, though, ironically, is not in the DOT regs for testing. They're waiting for approval by the Health and Human Services HSH. I'm sorry. Let me start. That's early in the morning. HHS, Health and Human Services Department, has still not approved testing for fentanyl within the DOT regs. They feel that fentanyl is usually added to other products. And not surprisingly, it is added to heroin. And that's why they're feeling at the moment that there's no need to test for fentanyl because you'll test positive for heroin before you test positive for the fentanyl. So, although that would probably change, but just to give you a little bit of insight onto that. All right, so here's that one I was talking about, the pre-employment versus post-accident. Again, this is up here. It's for urine drug test. It's for the safety sensitive workforce as a whole. Going back to 2014. So you're looking at the pre-employment. So the pre-employment stayed relatively steady, right? Up until about 2022, it made a jump. Not surprising. Legalized marijuana, more people are taking a chance, more people are smoking pot, and they get popped on the pre-employment. Ironically, look at the large increase, though, in 21 into 22. You'll see a large post-accident increase in the testing. And one of the things we may attribute that to is if you know you're going for a job, you'll tend to not smoke marijuana so that you can pass the test. Now you've gotten the job, you're good to go, you're driving a truck or a commercial motor vehicle of some form, you get in an accident, now you go in for your post-accident, and now you test positive. Because once you've gotten the job, you feel that you can now go ahead and smoke marijuana on the weekend or do whatever you did and end up having an accident, and now you're testing positive. So again, the pre-employment guy comes in, he's good to go, but he doesn't have the education needed. He doesn't realize that legal marijuana does not work for him. And he goes ahead and falls back into his old habits, boom, has an accident. Now you as an employer are responsible for who knows what, repairs, damage, hopefully no personal injuries. And now that driver tests positive. And his response to you was, I thought it was legal in Ohio. Well, it isn't. So again, talking about percentages, you may say, oh, not a big percentage, right? We went from what, let's say 1.5 in 2020, maybe 1.6 up to, let's call it 2.1. On a percentage basis, the numbers don't sound that large. On a graphical representation such as this, you can see it looks a little bit more, a little bit more severe as that continues to rise. All right. Then we just have marijuana positivity, and this is related by the states that have legalized use status. So we can see that the national average in that purple line, gradually moving up from 2014. Neither recreational nor medical use has kind of stayed the same. Medical use only up and down here and there, but the recreational use, and again, man, there's that visual. You just can't get by without that visual, seeing that rise dramatically in 2022. So the recreational, and that's only going to get bigger as time goes on. So again, keep an eye on it. Help your employees, give them the education they need to stay out of trouble. All right, so let's move into, get off a little bit of graphs here and get into how does marijuana impair driving? And before I start on this one, I'll just, in my research, they actually did a study, someone did a study, and they found that the state of Colorado, there was an increase, a slight increase in accidents due to marijuana use. But what they found was, ironically, the severity of the accidents wasn't as high. And they attribute that to the fact that marijuana smokers would tend to drive a little slower. They realize they're impaired and they just don't want to bring attention to themselves, and they tend to drive a little slower. Not to say they won't have an accident, but the severity of that accident isn't as high as if you were drinking alcohol, for example, where at a certain point with alcohol, you tend to lose track of everything. And next thing you know, you're doing 100 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. Not a good thing. So, who would have thought that, okay, you're impaired, you could be arrested, you may have an accident, but the severity of that accident won't be as high necessarily as if you were drinking alcohol. So let's look at some of the items that may come with how does it impair your driving. So road tracking, for one. And this is a big one with police officers. They're behind the driver. They're watching to see what they do. Are they staying centered in their lane? And this is common for alcohol abuse or alcohol intoxication, is you use the line to drive down the road. So you're hugging that yellow line in the middle because that's what you're looking at as you drive. Or you're hugging the white shoulder line because you're impaired. Because you can't keep your vehicle between the lines because you're impaired. So road tracking is a big thing. Maintaining your road position as you travel, staying within your lane as you travel. Impaired cognitive skills. So using your mental skills to make decisions and reasoning. We probably have seen, well, I'm not going to say that we've done that, anybody on this call, but I'm sure we all have friends who have kind of lost those decision-making processes or reasoning processes when they drink. People who drink a little bit in excess tend to think they're a little bigger than they are, a little faster than their reflexes are faster than they really should be, and tend to give themselves a bigger opinion. So it's not surprising that that is something that occurs. Time and distance. So the perception, which is a big one, and the next slide I think is going to have something to do with perception and reaction times. But the perception of something changes as you become impaired. Your following distances, which commercial motor vehicles, we recommend six seconds generally at highway speeds and in good weather. That would change. Your objects near and far, what normal driving and you're not impaired looks different when you become impaired. Things may look a little further away than they really are. Things may look closer than they are. I'm sure we've been behind drunk drivers. The brake lights constantly go on because they're losing track of their distance, of what's in front of them or what's around them. And then we move on to the attention difficulties. Just being able to keep your attention on things. Your attention begins to waver as you become more impaired. You lose track of your surroundings. Also, use of your mirrors, which is highly recommended in commercial motor vehicles at 5 to 8 seconds, probably becomes negligible at that point. You probably wouldn't even be able to tell me when the last time you looked in your mirrors. You're looking so hard ahead of yourself because you're worried that the use of your mirrors has really become a secondary or even an item that you don't even think about. Also, changing your sight lines. We should constantly be changing our sight lines anyway. Looking out into the distance, bringing it back in close, especially in city driving. You know, keep a close eye on what's right in front of you, and then move to what's further out in the distance. Don't focus on one thing that's only right in front of your car. You want to look around and take things in. And then the last one would be reaction times. Okay, so you're going to obviously have a decrease in reaction times. And what's going to be funny on this next slide, they're going to give you 5 examples of reductions in reaction time. And I was actually surprised at where cannabis fell into this. So we're going to see that in a minute. But your reaction time will definitely be decreased the more impaired you become. So, effects on reaction time. Ironically, cannabis falls into, I guess, depending on how you look at it, it's either number 2 if you go down from the top to the bottom, or if you go from the bottom up, it's going to be number 4. So you kind of see where driving while high on cannabis is a 21% reduction in your reaction times. Not surprisingly, driving while using the phone in your hand is 46% reduction. Texting while driving is 37. You would think that 37, the texting would be higher because of the manipulation of the keyboard as you're trying to type out a message to your friend that you're going to be there in 5 minutes. But they found that actually using the hand, holding it in your phone is 46%. Using hands, hand-free, still a 27% reduction in your reaction time. Then we got driving high while on marijuana, 21%, and drinking and driving at the legal limit, 0.08 for regular drivers is still a 13% reduction in your reaction time. It's kind of interesting information. Surprised about that using the phone and texting. I thought it'd be flipped around there, but just some interesting information there. All right. So this slide was in the last webinar I did back in July on the CBD usage. A little heavy duty on information there. Just want to remind everyone that the current limit for THC within a CBD product is 0.3%. Anything above that is going to be considered marijuana. Now, Rand Paul, a senator out of Kentucky, Kentucky's got a huge growing program going on for hemp in Kentucky. They're having problems with trying to transport it. The growth of hemp in the ground, it's not a set thing. If you leave it in too long, that 0.3% can rise, making it marijuana. If it's harvested and sitting, it can continue to, I'm not sure what the word is. I'm going to say metabolize for lack of a better word, but it can continue to rise to THC level. So they've harvested the product, put it into a tractor trailer, want to have it taken to a processing plant that's in another state, and it could possibly turn into what's classified as marijuana because it continues to metabolize as time goes on. Because of that, actually, Rand Paul had put forth a bill, the Hemp Economic Mobilization Plan, back in December 2020, wanting to raise that limit from 0.3% up to 1% to allow for that change. Not sure where it's going. The Farm Bill expired in October 23, a few months ago, so that bill is currently in limbo, but it'll be interesting what occurs if they do change that limit to 1%. These next couple slides, these actually, again, were placed in that previous PowerPoint that I had done. Just wanted to kind of reinforce some information. So February 18, 2020, the DOT Office of Drug and Alcohol Policy and Compliance notice. So the summary of that notice was that DOT requires testing for marijuana, not CBD. But again, if it gets above that 0.3%, it's marijuana. So a driver goes in, he used CBD during the weekend, test positive on Monday. That is not a valid excuse for a positive drug screen. There's no federal oversight or certification of CBD products at this point in time, and CBD is not a legitimate explanation for a positive drug result. So even the DOT itself, since the use of CBD products could lead to a positive drug test result, DOT regulated safety sensitive employees, which is what we're talking about today, should exercise caution when considering whether to use CBD products. So please make that apparent to your employees beginning hopefully today. All right. In 2021, the CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, was advising caution when purchasing Delta 8 products, which is the non-THC version of CBD. And also in January of 2023, the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, actually indicated a need for better regulation. So everyone knows that it needs to be regulated better, but at the moment, nobody is doing anything about it. It's really up to the consumer themselves to make that decision. And you can't make an educated decision without the information. So again, is marijuana legal at the federal level? Well, as can be shown in those earlier slides about the federal areas in Washington, it is not. So no, federal law classifies marijuana as a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substance Act, CSA. No relation, by the way, to compliance, safety, and accountability that's currently going on right now, and which is going to make its move. And I did a thing on this back in, was it November possibly, about the prioritization preview program. And that's currently in phase 2. Haven't heard any new information on that. So the government doesn't recognize its medical use and considers it still a substance of high risk for abuse. And back to that 2 slides ago with Kentucky and Rand Paul, possessing, growing, transporting, and or distributing marijuana is a federal felony. And also Freight Waves. I think it's a magazine, might be an online magazine. They actually had an article back in August 29th of 2022 related to unclear guidance discussing the transportation of marijuana. Really interesting article. Anybody thinking about trying to get some jobs moving marijuana around may want to read that and find out some of the pitfalls involved in trying to get into that end of the business. So if I test positive, let's look what's going to occur in the near future, because this is really going to put a little bit of a restriction on some people. And also we can get into some of this information by the clearinghouse, fmcsa.gov, the register. Go in there, you can find this information, but let's see what they're talking about. So as of November 18, 2024, and it's coming up, 10 months from now, there's going to be a prohibited status within the FMCSA's Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. And they partnered with the state driver's licensing agencies, which in other words, SDLAs, if you'd like to shorten that, allowing them to be able to query the clearinghouse, kind of like you're querying now as an employer on prospective employees and continuing with that annual query. Well, now the states can go in and they can downgrade CDLs into a prohibited status. Also for people who are looking to get a CDL that have tested positive, they can go in and actually put that CDL permit or the CDL itself into a prohibitive status if you test positive due to a drug and or an alcohol violation. So you'll have to complete the return to duty status program, 49 CFR Part 40, Subpart O, before resuming operating a commercial motor vehicle on a public roadway. And also keep in mind, this information remains in the clearinghouse for 5 years. That's a long time, even regardless of whether you have to go through that drug and alcohol process, with the SAP and the whole thing and the 6 tests within the first year. It's just a long process. So again, there's just so much aggravation involved with testing positive that it'd be a shame for someone to fall into that unknowingly because of lack of information. So keeping your workplace safe. So let's spend a couple seconds or minutes talking about training your managers and supervisors. Now keep in mind, this is mandated. Under Part 40, the procedures for transportation, and Part 382, the controlled substance and alcohol use, specifically 382-603, training for supervisors. And for lack of a better word, we might as well throw managers in there too. So anybody that can do reasonable suspicion training needs to have this training done. It's mandated. Were you to be audited, you're going to have a record that this training has been completed. Now, luckily, it's 60 minutes on alcohol and it's 60 minutes of controlled substance training. So basically 2 hours of training. It is a one and done. You only have to do it once. You do not have to do it on a recurring basis at this point in time. And it falls under 382.307. So some of the reasonable suspicion training that they'll learn was that it needs to be specific. Examples, locations. Where was it? In the bathroom, in the smoking area, in their personal vehicle, in the commercial motor vehicle vehicle. Contemporaneous. So is it existing or occurring at the same period of time? This isn't something that occurred last week that I'm trying to send Joe in for a reasonable suspicion test because I saw what I thought was a problem last Friday. It needs to be current. Articulable. You need to express or explain. You can't just say, well, I think he was smoking pot. I think he was he was impaired by alcohol. It needs to be expressed articulably. I saw him shuffling, or his gait was off, or he almost tripped and fell while walking down the hallway in our main building. Something like that. Those are things that with the training that you'll be taught and be able to put into your systems. Okay, so observations related to the appearance, behavior, speech, body odors, lethargy, uncoordinated movements, slurred speech, difficulty breathing, things like that. And we want to refrain from taking hearsay from fellow employees. Hey, Bob, I saw Joe yesterday, or I saw Joe a minute ago. He looked like he was drunk. That's hearsay. That person wasn't trained in reasonable suspicion training. Okay? So I think this pretty much explains it all. Legal does not mean safe. Probably wouldn't be a bad poster now that I'm looking at it from an outside view looking in. When you're in the weeds making all these things, you kind of get lost in the woods there. But now that I'm looking at it, probably wouldn't be a bad poster to put up. You might want to think about that, Conrad. Bring that up to AIM. But legal does not mean safe. I don't know how much clearer we can put that. Making our employees understand the possible consequences of poor decisions is really what should be our focus. Education, regular targeted reminders, memos. If you're using Infinity, for example, maybe some things on your computer screen, many different ways to get the word out there. And also just from a HR perspective, we may want to go back and look at our human resources policies. How are they worded? Does it have this information in there? I know at AIM we spend a great amount of time putting together our HR policies, and they're very in depth. They cover a lot of stuff. So again, although this pertains to drivers and things of that nature, it may be worth it for safety to get involved with HR and really kind of highlight some of these areas that need to be updated if they aren't. And with that, I think we're on the end of it. Yes, we are. I want to thank everyone for being on this webinar. I really enjoyed it. I hope you got some more information in addition to what I had done previously on that CDL and CBD usage webinar. Look forward to any future webinars that we got coming up. I gave you the list of the 3 that we have coming up there all the way up into August. Looking forward to doing those. And Conrad, I'll turn it back over to you for the closing items.
Yeah, thank you, John. You did a great job. I just want to quickly open it up for questions. I did see one that came through during this was in reference to the FMCSR's testing. They said that this person did it years ago. Is it recommended to complete a new one?
Mm,
It was like
not
3
sure.
slides back.
Yeah, they tested.
It says I did that years ago.
Oh, if
Yeah,
you're talking about the training for
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
supervisors, no,
yeah.
it's a one and done.
Okay.
So if that person did it, and they've documented that. It's in the record that they've done it, because were they to be audited, now I'm not an auditor, but I do know one thing. If I was going to audit somebody tomorrow, that's one of the things I'd ask. Where is the training for Conrad's reasonable suspicion training? And you'll say, well, he did it 4 years ago. Okay, great. Where's the paperwork? What do you have to show me that he did it? So if you don't have it, that would be a violation under the audit. I'd highly recommend you go back and make sure you do have documentation. And I'm not selling anything, but I know JJ Keller has got some items. I'm sure there's many others out there. Probably you could get it. Again, if you haven't done it, you're not sure, it's really worth it to spend 2 hours and get back up to date and start fresh from today, so that you know for a fact that you got the stuff. But if you can pull out that piece of paper documentation showing me he did it, you're good to go.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Amanda. Got another question. Where do we stand on mouth swab testing? Is it now allowed versus urine testing?
That's a great question. In fact, I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's hard when you get into doing this stuff. You get further and further down the rabbit hole. I did look into the oral test. The problem is it's just on a webinar, I think, with JJ Keller had done a webinar, and that similar question was asked. And the problem is the testing labs there. I don't think there's testing labs that are all certified yet to accommodate the oral testing. I think that's the problem. So you could probably Google oral testing, DOT, something along those lines, and get a better answer. But if I'm not mistaken, it was because the testing labs themselves have not been certified. Not that they couldn't do it, but they're not certified. And you'd actually need 2 labs, because you have to have the secondary confirmation test if that were to be done. So I think that's the main reason why it's currently not in a huge use at the moment.
All right, awesome. Thank you. And thank you for your question, Emil. Good to see you on here. Um, okay, this other question. I just heard this Renee said, I just heard that if you have more than 10 drivers, you have to have more than 1 supervisor trained. Have you heard about that?
I have not. I don't. No, I don't think there's anything to do with that. If by chance you find a regulation saying more than 10 employees, I'd like to see it. But I'm having a funny feeling that it really doesn't matter. It could be 1 employee or 50 employees. If the supervisor had 1 or 10 or 20, as long as he was trained in reasonable suspicion training, that would be sufficient.
Gotcha. Okay, then this one's from Aaron. Is there a preferred or required source for the manager slash supervisor training for FMCSR Part 382?
Read that one more time, Connor.
Is there so I'm thinking, is there like an official source where they need to get the training? So it says, is there a preferred or required source for the manager supervisor training?
No, no, they can use any individual. I just mentioned JJ Keller is a huge, obviously a huge nationwide company. They have some great material. We've used JJ Keller. I think we continue to use JJ Keller. I think Infinity's got it also because we had Infinity. Not sure of other companies because those are the only two we use, but I'm sure there's others.
Cool. Any more questions out there? I know we're a little over time here. You can raise your hand or just type something in the chat box. Give it a second here to see if anything comes through. All right. Well, I'm not seeing anything as of now. So, but if any of you have any questions for John about today's topic or anything else safety related, he truly is a wealth of knowledge, and you can feel free to shoot him an email. I'll be sure to include his email address in the follow up email that I'll be sending out. And if you'd like to learn any more about AIM services, you can reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk. And finally, make sure you keep an eye out for future webinar invites landing in your inbox or popping up on social media. And most of all, just want to thank everyone for your time today. We really appreciate you spending your morning with us. And thank you, John, for another great presentation.
Thank you very much for the invite. Can't wait for the next one.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.